Hello friends, today we are going to study the nature and types of assessment from module 13. The objectives of this module are to know the nature of personality assessment, understand the methods of observation as a tool of personality assessment, understand the use of checklist in personality assessment, and explore the use of rating scales in personality assessment. Personality testing. Personality occupies a central role both in the field of psychology and in psychological testing. Although the first tests developed were not of personality but of aptitude by the Chinese and of intelligence by the French psychologist Binet, the assessment of personality has been a major endeavor. In general, when we talk about personality, we are talking about a variety of characteristics whose unique organization define an individual and to a certain degree determine that person's interaction with himself or herself, with others and with the environment. A number of authors consider attitudes, values and interest under the rubric of personality. Still others quite correctly include the assessment of psychopathology such as depression and psychopathological states such as schizophrenia. Finally, the assessment of positive functioning is also considered, such as creativity, under the rubric of personality. Measuring personality can help predict how people will behave at work, at school, and in therapy. However, painting a detailed picture can be a challenge. In many instances, it requires several of the techniques to capture a personality. Psychologists use interviews, observations, questionnaires, and projective tests to assess personality. Each method has strengths and limitations. For this reason, they are often used in combination. Nature of personality assessment. Personality assessment is a proficiency in professional psychology that involves the administration, scoring, and interpretation of empirically supported measures of personality traits and styles in order to refine clinical diagnosis, structure and form psychological interventions, and increase the accuracy of behavioral prediction in a variety of contexts and settings, such as clinical, forensic, organizational, educational settings. Psychologists aim not only to describe behavior but also to measure it. For example, it is always expected to know not just that an individual is aggressive, but why he is aggressive and how much he is more aggressive than his fellows. Based on this, a variety of attempts can be made to measure personality. There are two assumptions behind these attempts: that a person's personality, once formed, can be constant across situation and time, but also paradoxically that it can change as a result of experience. There are ways to measure personality, such as by questioning people directly about their feelings and behavior, by making inferences based on their responses to the material, and measuring their behavior by using some objective measurements. The direct observation of behavior one possesses has many problems. People can give socially desirable responses. People may not be comfortable in answering truthfully, and the inferences drawn based on such expressed behavior may be misleading. As a result, the indirect approach to measure personality is more preferred. The indirect approach to assess the personality falls into two categories: measurement through self-report inventories and standardized questionnaires, and measurement through a disguised technique to tap the hidden aspects of personality. Uses of personality assessment. Personality testing and assessment refers to techniques that are used to accurately and consistently measure personality. Personality test can be used to help further clarify a clinical diagnosis, to guide therapeutic interventions, and to help predict how people may respond in different situations. Personality is something that we informally assess and describe every day. When we talk about ourselves and others, we frequently refer to different characteristics of an individual's personality. Psychologists do much the same thing when they assess personality, but on a much more systematic and scientific level. Personality tests are administered for different purposes, such as for assessing theories, to look at changes in personality, to evaluate the effectiveness of therapy, diagnosing psychological problems, screening job candidates. Personality tests are also sometimes used in forensic settings to conduct risk assessment, establish competence, and in child custody disputes. Personality tests can be useful for a number of reasons. These tests can help one learn more about himself or herself and better understand both one's strengths and weaknesses. While all personality tests are different, learning that one might be high on a specific trait can help him or her gain greater insight into his or her own behavioral patterns. Types of personality assessment. Observation. Are you fascinated by airports, bus depots, parks, railway stations, or other public spaces? Many people relish a chance to observe the actions of others. When used for assessment, direct observation, that is, looking at behavior, is a simple extension of the natural interest in people watching. For instance, a psychologist might arrange to observe a disturbed child as she plays with other children and observe her for the following questions. Is the child withdrawn? Does she become hostile or aggressive without warning? By careful observation, the psychologist can identify girls' personality traits and clarify the nature of her problems. Psychologists or researchers use observation as a scientific tool to learn about behavior, but they use it in a planned, precise, and systematic manner. They use observational techniques to measure behavior as it occurs. Thus, observation is inspection of the overt behavior of a person in appropriate situations. It is a popular method to study the behavior patterns of an individual in an actual life situation. The observer decides what personality traits or characteristics he needs to know, and then he observes the relevant activities of the subject in real life situations. To ensure the reliability of observed result, the observer may repeat the observation in the same situation several times. It concerns with perception of an individual's behavior by the other individuals and the interpretation and analysis of this perceived behavior by them. Observation, that is watching what people do, would seem to be an obvious method of carrying out research in psychology. However, there are different types of observational methods and distinctions need to be made between them. Let us discuss some of them. Direct observation. A direct observation is one that can be made with the naked eye. To collect the information, the observer has two options. The observer may participate in the activities of the person being observed, called participant observation. Here, observer becomes the part of the group which he wants to observe. Or the observer may remain detached from the activities of the person being observed, called as non-participant observation or indirect observation. Here, the researcher does not have direct contact with the people being observed or without actual participation. In second one, the researcher uses some recording systems like a tape recorder or a video recorder or one-way mirror observation. The behavior under investigation is clearly visible and overt and can be easily recorded in writing or on videotape. For example, in a study of communication patterns, researchers might ask a group of participants to discuss a controversial issue and then make direct observation of who started the discussion, who changed the topic, who said nothing, and so on and so forth. Techniques and methods in direct observation are anecdotal record. It is a written record immediately after an incident occurs, that is, in the situation it occurs and place of occurrence. These are observational notes about something that has struck the observer. Running record. Here, everything happens in a situation is written down, including each action and dialogue. A specimen record is a detailed recorded version of a particular person, situation, and the environment. Time sampling records. In time sampling, the behavior is recorded only if it occurs at the end of the time period. When the specified amount of time has expired, the observer looks at the subject and determines whether or not the behavior is occurring. In general, this technique is used for behaviors which are longer in duration. The other records are even sampling record, graphic scale and checklist. Controlled observation or structured observation. Controlled observation, usually a structured observation, are likely to be carried out in a psychology laboratory. The researcher decides where the observation will take place, at what time, with which participants, in what circumstances, and uses a standardized procedure. Participants are randomly allocated to each independent variable group. Rather than writing a detailed description of all behaviors observed, it is often easier to code behavior according to a previously agreed scale using a behavior schedule. The researcher systematically classifies the behavior they observe into distinct categories. Coding might involve numbers or letters to describe a characteristic or use of a scale to measure behavior intensity. The categories on the schedule are coded so that the data collected can be easily counted and turned into statistics. For example, Mary Ainsworth used a behavior schedule to study how infants responded to brief period of separation from their mothers. During this strange situation procedure, infants' interaction behaviors directed towards the mother were measured, such as proximity and contact seeking, contact maintaining, avoidance of proximity and contact, resistance to contact and comforting. The observer noted down the behavior displayed during 15 seconds interval and scored the behavior for intensity on a scale of 1 to 7. Sometimes the behavior of participant is observed through a two-way mirror, or they are secretly filmed. This method was used by Albert Bandura to study aggression in children through the Bobo doll studies. Controlled observation are usually overt, as the researcher explains the research aim to the group, so the participants know they are being observed. Controlled observation are also usually non-participant, as the researcher avoids any direct contact with the group, keeping a distance. Strengths of controlled observation are: controlled observation can be easily replicated by other researchers by using the same observation schedule. This means it is easy to test for reliability. The data obtained from structured observation is easier and quicker to analyze, as it is quantitative, making this a less time consuming method compared to naturalistic observation. Controlled observations are fairly quick to conduct, which means that many observations can take place within a short amount of time. This means a large sample can be obtained, resulting in the findings being representative and having the ability to be generalized to a larger population. Limitations of controlled observation are: controlled observation can lack validity due to the Hawthorne effect or demand characteristics. When participants know they are being watched, they may act differently. Naturalistic or unstructured or uncontrolled observation. Naturalistic observation is a research method commonly used by psychologists and other social scientists. This technique involves observing and studying the spontaneous behavior of participants in natural surroundings. The researcher simply records what they see in whatever way they can. In unstructured observation, the researcher records all relevant behavior without system. There may be too much to record, and the behavior recorded may not necessarily be the most important, so the approach is usually used as a pilot study to see what type of behaviors would be recorded. Observing some naturally occurring behavior with no attempt to change or interfere with is called an unstructured or uncontrolled observation, and is also widely used in psychology. It allows researchers to get a realistic picture of how behavior occurs because they are actually watching that behavior. One of the primary ways in which to learn about others is to look at what they do. Naturalistic observation is especially useful in the early stages of an investigation to discover the extent of some phenomenon or to get an idea of what the important variables and relationship might be. The data from naturalistic observation often provide clues so that an investigator can formulate a specific hypothesis to be tested by other research methods. But here there is a possibility of observer bias. With regard to human subjects, Margaret Mead used this method to research the way of life of different tribes living on islands in the South Pacific. Cathy Silva used it to study children at play by observing their behavior in a playgroup in Oxfordshire. Advantages of natural observation are: it is easy to collect data and no spatial arrangement or tools are required. As the aim of psychology is to understand and predict behavior in life situations, observation method gives the scope to study behavior in life situations. The disadvantages are: some aspects of behavior are implicit and are not open to observation. Feelings and other internal processes cannot be observed. It is difficult to convert data from natural observation into quantitative terms. Subjectively bias and prejudices also color our observations. Many instances of behavior do not repeat themselves. For example, effect of natural disaster. It involves lot of time and effort. With observation, we do not have manipulation of variables or control over extraneous variables, which means cause and effect relationship cannot be established. Participant observation. Participant observation is a variant of the natural observation, but here the researcher joins in and becomes part of the group. They are studied to get a deeper insight into their lives. This approach was used by Leon Festinger in a famous study into a religious cult who believed that the end of the world was about to occur. He joined the cult and studied how they reacted when the prophecy did not come true. Participant observations can be either covert or overt. Covert is where the study is carried out undercover. The researcher's real identity and purpose are kept concealed from the group being studied. The researcher takes a false identity and role, usually posing as a genuine member of the group. On the other hand, overt is where the researcher reveals his or her true identity and purposes to the group and asks permission to observe. Limitations of participant observation are: it can be difficult to get time or privacy for recording. If the researcher becomes too involved, he may lose objectivity and become biased. There is always the danger that we will see what we expect or want to see. This is a problem as he could selectively report information instead of noting everything they observe, thus reducing the validity of their data. Checklist. It is a selected list of words, phrases or sentences following which an observer records a check to denote the presence or absence of whatever being observed. A checklist allows the researcher to record whether or not a given behavior occurs. The desired behavior must be explicitly defined so that there is no question in the mind of the observer as to whether or not they occur. It is a tool for identifying the presence or absence of conceptual knowledge, skills, or behavior. Checklists are used for identifying whether key tasks in a procedure, process, or activity have been completed. The tasks may be a sequence of steps or include items to verify that the correct sequence was followed. One may need to observe the task being followed because, in general, as one cannot judge what task the learner did from the end of product. Remember that some attitudes may be indirectly observed. One format common in personality measurement is the adjective checklist. Gog, 1960. With this method, the participant receives a long list of adjectives and indicates whether each one is characteristic of himself or herself. Adjective checklist can be used for describing either oneself or someone else. The adjective checklist requires participants either to endorse such adjectives or not, thus allowing only 2 choices for each item. Here are some examples of the checklist related to personality traits. In the first, you can see characteristic traits are being listed as checklist, and whatever applies to the participant who is answering the checklist has to put a tick mark beside it. As you can see in the second example of the checklist, the participant has checked the appropriate answers according to his preferences. Rating scale. A rating scale is a list of personality traits or aspects of behavior that can be used to evaluate a person. Rating scale limit the chance that some traits will be overlooked while others are exaggerated. Thus, a rating scale consists of a set of traits such as generosity, cooperativeness, punctuality, honesty, etc. the range of description that are to represent level or degree of presence of trait. Usually, the degrees are indicated by numbers 3, 5, 7 point scales. In rating scale, we rate an individual of the possession or absence of certain traits on a certain scale. The individual is given a place on the scale or a score which indicate the degree to which a person possesses a given behavior trait. For example, if we want to rate students on their sociability, we might ask 3 or 4 supervisors or teachers to point out the place of each student on the scale, which may be as follows: avoids others, tolerates others, likes others well, seeks others. This scale has 5 degrees of the trait to be rated. That is, this is a 5-point scale. Some scales have 3 or 7 degrees. The rating scale is one of the oldest and most versatile of assessment techniques. It presents users with an item and asks them to select from a number of choices. The rating scale is similar in some responses to a multiple choice test, but its options represent degree of a particular characteristics. Rating scales come in many varieties. There are rating scales to rate the self and there are rating scales to rate others. Some rating scales require the rater to make careful observation, like does the patient make this bed, while others require the rater to make evaluation and express opinions such as how well does the patient get along with the other patients on the ward. Rating scales vary in format. In general, they are either alphabetical, numerical, graphic or of the forced choice variety. The alphabetical rating scales use letters keyed to some type of description as the rating system. The letter grade rating system of A to F excluding the letter E is an example of the alphabetical rating system. A format, numerical as its name implies, employs numbers keyed to description. For example, 0 is equal to the least to 100 determining the most. With graphic rating scales, the rater's task is to check off or mark some line, numbers, letters or point on a figure. One widely used rating scale of this graphic variety is called the semantic differential. Developed by Osgood, Sushi and Tenenbaum 1957, the semantic differential is a technique that employs bipolar adjectives and a 7-point rating scale. The examinee is instructed to respond to the presentation of some idea, concept, issues by checking off one of the 7 spaces between the bipolar adjectives. Forced choice rating scale contain 2 or more description for which the rater must select the most appropriate. Forced choice ratings are useful in self-rating instruments and in other situations where there might exist a special need to minimize errors in rating as a function of bias or response sets. One form of rating that requires special mention is ranking. In essence, ranking entails an ordering of rating with reference to some bipolar variables such as highest to lowest, most to least or strongest to weakest. Here are some examples of rating scales. Like academic detailing is a useful form of education that aligns providers prescribing behavior with evidence-based practice. It is being rated such as strongly agree is given 0.1, disagree 0.2, neutral 0.3, agree 0.4 and strongly agree 0.5. Another example of a statement being rated is I am going to read you a series of statements regarding this health clinic. For each statement, please tell me if you strongly agree, neither agree, not disagree, disagree or strongly disagree. Summary of the lesson. In this module, we studied the nature of personality assessment, the advantages and disadvantages of using personality assessment methods. We also learned about some of the types of personality assessment such as observation method and its types, uses of checklist and rating scales. Thank you.